Welcome to Wine, Women, and Writing. This is Pamela Fagan Hutchins, and this is the show where I talk with other writers about their stories with complex, authentic female characters at their core, and some of the real life or other inspirations that lead to these kick-ass characters and women. And we do it with a lot of irreverence, a lot of coffee, or depending upon time of day, a lot of wine, and the occasional dive into oversharing if we're lucky. Today, I'm going to be talking with someone I'm super excited to talk about. But before we launch into that, I wanted to remind you that if you want to look at past episodes or see upcoming episodes, because remember, it's even more fun if you've read the book first before I have the guest on the show, then you can go to my website, PamelaFaganHutchins.com, where you can also get my new release, the Maggie box set, which is 3 of the full-length novels from my USA Today bestselling and Silver Falchion mystery, best mystery winning series, What Doesn't Kill You. But enough with that. On to the show, as they say. I'm feeling very theatrical today. I'm feeling very performance oriented. So I apologize in advance if I get a little crazy, but it may be the influence of my guest, who is the fantabulous New York Times best-selling author of The Huntress, Kate Quinn. Good morning, Kate.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me. I do have my coffee. I'm ready for shenanigans.
Excellent, excellent. And I should tell you guys that this is a miracle of modern technology, because Kate's in San Diego, I'm on the face of the mountain, and so far technology has not betrayed us. Stick with us if we have a little hiccup, because it's been known to happen. That or a couple of crazed beasts running across the screen, I hear, at your house anyway, right, Kate?
The canines may decide to make an appearance. They do sometimes feel that their presence is required whenever I happen to turn on a video camera.
Oh, of course, of course. And so tell us a little bit about these fine fellows or fellies, which is it, before we meet them in person?
I have 2 wonderful black rescue mutts named Caesar and Calpurnia, and they are very much my companions and little Praetorian guards who sit on either side of me and make sure that I am kept safe while I hit my word count, because I cannot be trusted to chase the mailman off on my own.
I love them already. Now, the names, I've got to say, the names lead me to one of my first questions, which is that up until the last year or two, you'd been writing in a different era, so to speak. Historical novelist, for those of you that have not read Kate before, and if you haven't, then I don't know really what your problem is, because she's awesome. But if you haven't read her last 2 books, you would think that she writes about ancient Rome, the Italian Renaissance, and the dogs hearken more their names back to that era, it sounds like.
Yes, I did name them kind of after, a little tongue-in-cheek, after Caesar and Caesar's wife, and it was sort of it was definitely a bit of a joke. But I happen to have a bit of a classic background simply because my mother's a librarian, and she happened to have a degree in ancient and medieval history. So that when I was growing up, I was getting stories about, Caesar crossing the Rubicon, and Alexander and the Gordian Knot, and the Tudors, and the Medicis, and all these wonderful folks of the past who were much more real to me than any of the Disney princesses. So that's what I gravitated to as soon as I began to get old enough to tell my own stories.
And I got Goldilocks and the 3 Bears. So your family was doing something right. Look what it produced. So now you made this transition, though, from ancient history to a more contemporary history, the 20th century, if you will. What made you change gears from Rome and Italy to more modern day history?
Well, it actually was exactly 2 years ago today that the Alice Network was first hitting stands. And yeah, it has been quite a ride. And the reason I ended up changing was, a number of them, really. One reason being is that I've never really been a one era girl. I've always been fascinated by multiple periods in history. And also it's a way to sort of keep fresh, reinvigorate your stories if you can sort of investigate a new time period. I mean, the reason that I jumped first from ancient Rome to the Renaissance was because I hit about my 3rd book in first century Roman, I thought that I was literally going to drive a pencil into my eye if I had to type the word Toga one more time. So hence a jump to the Renaissance. So, another jump to somewhere even more distant wasn't that big of a leap for me. A little scary because it was very different and it meant a lot of research. But one of the reasons I picked the 20th century was because, I'm looking around for something new, something different. And what I was seeing, since this was 2015 when I was doing my research, that was when we were getting a lot of 100-year anniversaries for World War I. And it was the end of 2014, start of 2015. So 100-year anniversary of the start of the war, of this battle, of that battle. And, we were seeing that wonderful poppy monument at the Tower of London. Pictures of it were all over the internet, and so I was kept reading these articles, seeing these pictures, and I was thinking, something in the First World War, I wonder what I could find. And I ended up finding the story of the historic Alice Network. And then at that point, it was pretty much off to the races.
That's pretty cool. It is so different. That era is, well, it's still in the memory of living persons, so people attach really strong personal feelings still to it, so it's very different than, say, ancient Rome, for instance, in that, you're not really dealing with something that grandma carries with her personally and is still passing down in the family.
Yeah, that is, I think, the reason why war stories continue to be such a boom. I mean, because people keep asking, so many war stories, especially World War II, why do we keep seeing more and more? The public appetite for them just doesn't seem to be flagging. And I think that's because we are starting to come to the awareness that our veterans are aging out. And at some point, these stories will be gone once the people who carry them are dead. And it's this urge, I think, to learn these stories, to find out more about this generation while we can. And so that's why I think really you are seeing this boom in war stories. And I think why it probably is going to continue.
It is. It is something, I think, that's universal, that you reach this point where you realize the stories of the people in your family are about to die out. And there's books that I'm currently considering writing that are about my grandmothers, just as I reach the realization that their stories are going to die if I don't tell them, because they just passed away. So it's a tough thing. And it's then the transition to the Huntress, from the Alice Network was World War I, and you pushed it forward another huge leap to World War II. How'd you come up with the Huntress? Before I go all fangirl on you and start talking about everything I love about it, how'd you come up with the story?
Well, it was really the result of a couple of different historical snippets that I had run across that then sort of collided in my brain and stuck to each other. The first one being a fantastic squib that I found somewhere, which was about a woman who was a Nazi war criminal who was found in the 60s living in plain sight as a housewife in Queens, New York. And her husband, who was American, and her American neighbors were absolutely flabbergasted that she had this horrendous past as a brutal camp guard. And they said, she was, gentle as a fly, wouldn't hurt anybody. Surely they had the wrong person, but they didn't. They did have the right person. She did have this past. And then she ended up becoming, after a very long and struggle with and a lot of paperwork, the very first Nazi war criminal to be extradited from the United States to face trial in Europe. And that didn't happen until the 70s. And when it happened, the first one was a woman.
Wow.
And that fascinated me, the idea of, for one thing, a criminal living in plain sight, nested in the epitome of, white picket fence suburban America. Mm-hmm. And especially in the era we think of, the Leave It to Beaver era, the 50s and 60s, wholesome. It's, nobody has any secrets, of course, that's only the outer facade. We know that the 50s and 60s are not the pure and good time, but the idea that someone like that could be hiding inside just a plain American family that has no idea what they're concealing was fascinating to me. So that was part of it. And that made me think, a female war criminal and the urge to the search to find her. And so when she has gone to ground somewhere as innocuous as America in the 50s. And so that was one part of it. And then the other part was, I was looking for another character to wind into this. I wanted another female character who was, really badass, to be honest. I wanted someone, like the book was missing something. And I happened to run across, and it's like a 2 a.m. Google hunt, I run across a story on the Night Witches, which was the all-female regiment of bomber pilots who flew against Hitler's Eastern Front in World War II from Russia. And, I had actually read about them before, so they weren't totally unknown to me, but I ran across them again at just the right time that I really sat bolt upright and was like, this is it. Like, that's who I want to be the other part of this book. So I sort of had these two ideas, and then I did a lot of, like mashing them together until I figured out how they would fit. And that's pretty much the book.
Well, I'm glad you made them fit, because honestly, Nina Markova made the book for me. She was badass, like you say. I mean, from the very beginning, and the personal traumas that drove her, to run away from her home and to become a pilot, and the things she faced, and her loves and her losses. I was just, the whole time I was like, I was in love with her. So
I rarely had a character run away with a book on me more strongly. It's like she sort of careened onto the page and, just took off. And I was pretty much just running to keep up with her the entire time.
Well, and when you think about your title, I mean, I'm assuming that originally the title, The Huntress, was because of the name of this Nazi war criminal that was being hunted and had been a hunter and ran away. But in many ways, Nina's the huntress now. She's going after the huntress, and so it for me really worked that she was so strong, because she became the White Knight version of that huntress, so.
Yeah, I had the idea that they would sort of be two sides of the same coin. There's some parts of Nina that are dark,
Mm-hmm.
There are things, she does not have a lot in the way of what you might think of as moral breaks. There's a lot of things that it does not really bother her to do in the slightest, which might perhaps shock some of her counterparts on her team who look at her sometimes and just think you are an utter barbarian. But still, at the same time, there are things about Nina that mean that there are lines she won't cross. And those are some of the things that will enable her to, hunt down the huntress. So in the end, the hunter becomes the hunted. And the title actually came around. We went through something like 3 or 4 titles. And so that was like the final one we landed on. But I do like it. I'm quite happy with it, just because, yes, it does refer to the villainess, who is nicknamed Die Jägerin, which is German for the huntress. And that is her nickname. But on the other hand, the way I wanted to craft it was that really all the female characters in the end have a turn at that particular moniker in their way. The huntress, the villainess, is a huntress in a very bad way. She hunts the weak, and she hunts those who are helpless. And the ones who, the good ladies, the ladies who also earn that nickname, they earn that nickname because they are hunting down her, the one who hunts the weak. So everybody gets their turn at the nickname.
And I guess we should also, while we're talking about strong females, take the younger generation in here as well. Jordan, the 17-year-old stepdaughter whose intuitions were the only person whose intuitions were right on point was this young woman, who ultimately also is very key in the hunting of the huntress. And I liked that you took a teenage girl, and so many of the teenage girls in stories are a lot like my daughters. I have 3 daughters. Well, I say that 2 of my 3 daughters, they're a lot like 2 of my 3 daughters, but this girl was mature. This girl had aged beyond her years. Her mother had been lost to the family. And so she was a very mature, steady person without losing her teenagedness. So I really liked her as a character, and reminded me of my oldest daughter, Nicole. Hello, Nicole. But not Samantha or Michelle, my younger ones, who are like, the stereotypical teenage girl. There, I said it. I hope you're listening.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun with Jordan. I wanted I wanted to have a point of view that was inside the family where the Huntress was hiding. And I hope that, well, that's a spoiler for anybody who's listening. I'm sorry, but it really is pretty obvious in the first few chapters. It's not like a big reveal that in the class you're gonna miss.
It's suspense,
it's
but
kind
it's
of already there.
right, not a mystery, but suspense.
Yeah, and I wanted someone who was within the point of view of a point of view within the family where the villainess was hiding, and that was important because I wanted to have someone who knew her intimately, but in her new life, in her new recreated self, where she's trying very hard to lay low, be a good, just a good ordinary housewife, and fit in. And the thing is that most villains are not mustache twirling Disney, black hat wearing villains. Most villains in real life, they have human sides. They have people they love. They are nice to their dogs. Nobody is, very few people at least are, villainous and, absolutely, kick the puppy horrible to everybody they meet. So to have someone on the inside who literally sees the better side of a very bad woman, so that way there's a real sense of pain when you find out who she is and what she's done, seemed like an important thing, because that's really the thing that hurts the most when we find out maybe that someone we love has done something terrible or just done something wrong, is that you feel a sense of betrayal, that like, how did I read you wrong? How is it that I can still love you or want to be part of your life, or am I making excuses for you because I don't understand how the person that I love could have done something like this? So that's a hard place for anybody to be in, and most people have been there to some degree. I mean, ideally, hopefully you have not found out that someone in your family is a Nazi war criminal who has killed people, but everybody has the experience at some point when you are deeply disillusioned by someone you love, that who maybe proves they're not quite as morally on the high horse as you thought they were, or they're capable of a little bit more unscrupulousness than you really feel comfortable with. And that's a growing up moment. So Jordan was the eyes for that. And I really enjoyed her point of view too, because, Nina being a little crazy thing from eastern edge of Russia, I also kind of needed an ordinary girl to sort of balance the reader, so it's not all Nina's extremely skewed at times worldview, and you also get a more normalized one.
And in addition, going back to originally that story you found about the Nazi war criminal who was living in plain sight, you don't really get a sense of the 3 dimensions of that unless you have that embed, because otherwise it's just oh, wow, that's a crazy story. But you really felt it in this book. You felt her camouflage. You felt the moments when it slipped. You felt the moments in which the family didn't want to see what was in front of them. And it just became that's what made it spooky to me. That's what, because you kept thinking, what is she going, this woman has the capacity to do such horrible things, and they want to love her. They do love her. And she did wonderful things. She did kind things. So it really kind of give you the on the back of your neck, hair stand up on the back of your neck to think about, oh my gosh. I looked at my husband. I'm like, is there anything you want to tell me? That's your past. Have you fooled me?
Because thank you. That's a big compliment. I'm glad I could sow doubt in your home life. That's fantastic. But it was another thing too. I remember thinking of that. Like, I think it was Hitchcock who said, like, when a bomb is under a table and it goes off, that's action. When a bomb is under a table and it doesn't go off and everybody keeps playing cards on the table over it, that's suspense.
Yes.
So it was one of the things too that I kind of thought of my villainess as a little bit of an unexploded bomb, where the reader knows she's capable of some really terrible things if she's threatened, but the people in her life don't know this. And hopefully, you will grow to love the people who are in her life. So therefore you're on pins and needles. It's like, is she going to hurt them before the good guys get to her in time, because she could, if she, feels like she's threatened. So it's she's a little bit of an unexploded bomb too.
I love that analogy. That's very much what it felt like. And so in general, when I was thinking about reading this book, and I'm trying to recall the exact circumstances. I think it was before I knew anything about the book that your publicist set up this interview. And I'd been talking to Christina McMorris, and she was talking about, it was offline when we were doing the interview, and she had seen your name on my list, and she said, oh, you're going to love her. You're going to love this book. And And I did. I just did. And it isn't often that I just truly fall in love with a book and really get immersed like that. So thank you for a really authentic experience as a reader where as soon as you had Nina in that story, you had me, but it wasn't that, it was all of the different characters coming together and creating the full tapestry that made it. She hooked me, and then I was a sucker.
Well, thank you very much. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
You're welcome. So now, how do you top the Huntress and the Alice Network and your other great books? What are you working on now for us?
The next book is tentatively titled The Rose Code, and it is going to be about the female code breakers of Bletchley Park. Three very different women who all are sent to work at this isolated mansion and estate grounds in Buckinghamshire at the very outset of war. And they are put to work there in various different posts, helping to break the German military codes, which are supposed to be completely unbreakable, and which this huge, diverse team at Bletchley Park slowly wedged their way into that unbreakable code and continued to break those codes for the entirety of the war. And they did so successfully, it's estimated they shortened the war by at least 2 years.
Now, is this going to be suspense? What's your feel? What's your theme on this one?
I think there'll be some suspense as well. A lot of the book is going to be taking place during the war years, and dealing with the women and what their different jobs are, and also as they deal with the stress of secrecy, the fact that they can't tell their parents, their husbands, their boyfriends anything about what they do because of the Official Secrets Act. A lot of the story will deal with that, but there is also going to be a secondary story taking place after the war, in which you see the three women in vastly different circumstances, no longer even on speaking terms, and forced to come back together to solve a mystery that has its roots in their war years at Bletchley Park.
Cool. It sounds like that history, your ability to see the possibility in history is a very unique and fun part of your brain. So history, research, or writing, which do you like better? If you had to.
I suppose oh goodness. I love the early stage of plotting a book where I'm sort of daisy chaining around in history, finding historical tidbits that I can put in. The book is a little in flux at that point and is not fully set. So I can still, if I find something really cool, it's like, oh, I can tack the story around so I can include this. I like that stage because it's everything is very shiny and new. I haven't, the project is, perfect. It's, I haven't even remotely imagined hitting that stage where, I hate it and I hate everything about it. And I want to throw it in the fire and never speak of it again. And why don't I take up a career as a dog walker? Because that would be more fun. And, the early stages are a lot of fun, but really, they all have their high points. I like drafting. I like editing because, I actually do like editing, although first stage editing, at least, because then it feels you don't have to put something on that terrifying blank page. You just have to fix what's already there, which can be daunting, but at least it's already there to fix.
Exactly.
So, and I do like the research too. It's entirely possible to, go down the rabbit hole looking something up just because it's interesting, and then realize that, like half your workday is gone. I try not to do that too much because, writing time is precious, but, I think you can't get into the historical fiction business without a certain affinity for the rabbit hole, regardless, like it or not.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And it is, I don't know, when you get to the stage where you have to fill that blank page, for me at least, there's that feeling of you just want to turn back one more time and look for one more thing. That blank page is so daunting. Once you get going, it's fun, but that research, it's limitless possibility. It's explosions of excitement. And then the writing is like, boom, boom, bang your head, boom, boom.
It can feel like that, yeah.
And isn't it funny that we find ourselves writers and we all talk about, and then there's the pain of writing, and then there's the horrible blank page. But yet it's something we keep doing. We just,
yes, it is. That is true.
And so with respect to your writing and what you're working on, are you working on a next book after that? Do you have new ideas that come to you but when you're still writing the old book that you indulge yourself in every now and then, or do you stay focused and disciplined on the task at hand?
Well, there's always a certain amount of crossover. I read a really great tweet the other day, found it somewhere on Twitter, where someone said, writers are talking about what they wrote 5 years ago, promoting what they wrote 2 years ago, editing what they wrote last year, revising what they wrote last month, thinking about what they're going to write, 5 years from now. So, that is true to some degree. There's always something where I'm stretching past and present. I do stay focused on the book at hand, and I don't write 2 books at the same time unless I've done maybe some crossover like collaborative novels. I do collaborative novels for fun and with other authors, in which case that I'm only responsible for, for like 1/6 of the book instead of the whole thing. So that's a little different. And even so, it works better if they're very different time periods, so I'm not mixing them up really in my head. So I try to stay focused on the book at hand, especially while I've got to crank it out. Although I will say that is the time when new book ideas tend to come to call. And that's because your brain is desperately tired of the slog and wants to play. And even though you don't have time to indulge it. And I always kind of make the analogy that this is like when, you're maybe the relationship isn't as a bad patch, and you still love that significant other of yours, but they're kind of going through a period where they're doing nothing but sitting in front of the TV and grousing. And that is exactly when Alexander Skarsgard knocks on your door with a bottle of champagne and a hotel room key. And that you shouldn't, that you need to stick with the relationship you've got, and tell Alexander to get in line. But it's like, but there he is, and he didn't
and
even
you've seen Big Little Lies, and he you got to stay away
so
from
that's kind of like how I think of it when a new book idea bursts full flower into your head, like right at the time when you do not have any time to do anything but maybe like jot down a few notes about it and tell it to wait for a few months when you finally got time to think about what you're writing next.
My book and I are going through marriage counseling first. I'll talk to you later if there's a possibility we'll be getting together. So, well, I sure do appreciate, you had rescheduled me in when your schedule got tight. And I really appreciate that you stuck with it and spent the time to talk with me, because truly, hats off to your publicist who booked you with me, because now you have a fan and an evangelist, because I really, really enjoyed the book and can't wait for running the table, reading all the rest of them. Anything you'd like to tell listeners before we start our wrapping it up sequence, events coming up or things that they need to know, or where they can go to get the most excellent and up-to-date information on all things Kate Quinn?
You could always check my website. I do have current events on my events page, so you can check where I'm going to be showing up next. I'm going to Northern California later in this month, the San Francisco area, for a couple events. And I'm also going to, right after that, to the Historical Novel Society Conference in Maryland. So I'll be presenting there. I hope I see you guys there. And I do have another release coming out this year. It is titled Ribbons of Scarlet. It is the collaborative novel about the women of the French Revolution, which I co-wrote with 5 other female author friends, all fabulous. And that is available for pre-order any retailer that you like, and it's coming out October 1st.
What a fun project that would be. That sounds like a fabulous thing. So you guys check that out. In the meantime, as always, please know that this is a solely owned and copyrighted production of Authors on the Air Global Radio Network. And I, as always, thank my fantabulous producer, Pam Stack, for her love and support. Thank you, Pam. Mwah, mwah, mwah. And for the rest of you out there, before we bid Kate adieu, please go out and find yourself a good book. It would be awesome if it was The Huntress, if you did not follow instructions, and read it before this interview. But if not, then swing back and catch a couple of those old ones, the Alice Network and some of her ancient Rome and Italian Renaissance nuggets. And Kate, this has been really a lot of fun. Thank you so much for being on the show. Come back anytime.
Well, thank you very much for having me, and I hope I can come back after the next release.
Awesome. And the rest of you, take care. Talk to you next week.